Hello, Winterfest students. I want to talk to you for a minute today about eating together and eating as a spiritual discipline. You know, everybody has to eat. Our bodies need it, and we measure our calories. Sometimes when we're athletes, we measure to make sure we're getting enough, and sometimes when we want to lose a little weight, we measure to make sure we're not getting too much. We think a lot about eating in our culture, but I think it really can be a spiritual discipline to think about eating together. Think with me for just a minute about how often in Scripture we are given images or even invited to see how eating together is part of life with God. You know, when those strangers show up to visit Abraham and Sarah, those strangers who turn out to be God. Abraham invites them to come and eat. Jesus calls the disciples together for a supper and says, you know, this is my body, this is my blood, as he's giving them food, and they're eating together, and that becomes a central practice of the Christian life, that practice of celebrating the Lord's Supper. In eating together, I think something comes together for human beings that we don't often get to all bring together at the same time. There's our connection to the creation. You know, our food comes out of the ground. Sometimes we forget that when we're getting it from the grocery store, or even when we're not even preparing it for ourselves, just getting it, out of the fast food window on our way to do something else. But the food that sustains us comes from the earth. It is a gift of God's creation, and it is the gift of other people's hands who have prepared that food, and the people who serve us that food. And when we sit around a table and we're together with one another, our giving and receiving food, the food that keeps us alive, is a real concrete way that we take care of one another and that we celebrate what it means to be a community. And so I think the spiritual discipline of eating together is a way of us remembering that Jesus has called us to be a body. You know, the epistles in the New Testament talk a lot about how, we're a body with many members, and some of us are more like a hand and some of us are more like a foot, and Jesus is the head that holds us all together. But while we're out there in the world doing all the different things that we're doing, what is it that reminds us of the way we're connected? I don't think anything is more important than us eating together. And a lot of times, in terms of our witness in the world, I don't think anything is more important than the great diversity of God's people sitting down to eat together. I know it can sound simple, but I'm from North Carolina, and in North Carolina there's a deep tradition of racial segregation. The most radical thing that happened in 1960 in North Carolina was some white folks and some black folks in Greensboro, North Carolina, went down to a lunch counter and they sat down and they ate together. And as simple as that sounds, it sent shockwaves around the nation, and hundreds of campuses had sit-in movements that were a huge part of the civil rights movement in this country, that was a witness to the fact that God, the same God who made all of us, can bring us together even when there are things in the world that separate us. So I would encourage you to be intentional about practicing eating together as a spiritual discipline, and see what God might show you about how we can move from the world that is to the world that ought to be.